My grandson said he didn't want his friends to know who his grandma was, so I let him explain alone why he lost the car I was paying for. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I stood in my kitchen, the familiar weight of invisibility pressing down on my shoulders as I arranged the homemade apple pie on a serving plate. The sound of laughter drifted in from the dining room where my son James was entertaining his colleagues. It was his birthday celebration, and I had spent the entire day preparing his favorite dishes. "Mom? Hey, can you bring out some more ice for the drinks?" James called out, not bothering to look in my direction as I entered with the dessert. "Of course, dear." I smiled automatically, placing the pie on the table. No one acknowledged it. No one noticed the small burns on my fingers from the hot pan, or the sprinkle of cinnamon I'd added, just the way he liked it as a child. I was heading back to the kitchen when I heard it. "My mother!" James's voice carried clearly across the room. He was speaking to a colleague, a young man in an expensive suit. "Oh, she's just a retired school teacher. Nothing special. You know the type, never left the small town where she was born." The words landed like physical blows. I froze, the empty ice bucket clutched in my hands. 57 years old, widowed for 6 years, and somehow still capable of being wounded so deeply by a few careless words. I could feel eyes on me. Melissa, James's wife, had seen my reaction. For a moment, something like pity flashed across her face before she quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't noticed. The worst part wasn't that James had dismissed my entire existence in a single breath. It was that I wasn't even surprised. This was simply a more explicit version of how my children had treated me since Robert died, perhaps even before. I filled the ice bucket, arranged my features into the pleasant, undemanding expression they expected, and returned to the dining room. As I placed the ice on the table, Caroline, my daughter, glanced up from her phone. "Mom, did you remember to make the sauce without garlic? You know I can't have garlic." I had made 2 separate sauces, as I always did. "Yes, sweetheart. The small gravy boat is yours. Thanks." She returned to her phone without another word. That night, after everyone had left and I'd cleaned up alone, no offers of help, not even from my children, I stood in my bathroom, staring at my reflection. When had I become this faded version of myself? This doormat? This ghost? Robert had been gone for 6 years. My husband had been loving in his way, but he'd also established the pattern my children now followed so effortlessly. The way he'd pat my hand dismissively when I'd offer an opinion on finances. The way he'd interrupt me at dinner parties to clarify what I was trying to say. I'd been a history teacher for 30 years. I'd volunteered in this community for decades. I'd raised 2 children and managed a household. And yet somehow, I'd become invisible. As I removed my earrings, the ones Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary, I made a decision. I didn't know what it was yet, but something had to change. I couldn't keep disappearing a little more each day. I just didn't realize then how drastically everything was about to transform. "Mom, we can't make it for Sunday dinner this week." Caroline's voice came through the phone with that familiar edge of impatience, as if my weekly invitation was an imposition rather than an attempt to maintain some semblance of family connection. "That's all right, dear. Is everything okay?" I asked, already knowing what was coming. "Just super busy with this new project. The client is really demanding and—" The sound of her typing punctuated her words. She wasn't even giving me her full attention during a 2-minute call. "I understand," I said, though something in me had begun to resist accepting these constant cancellations. 6 months had passed since James's birthday party, and the pattern had only intensified. Last-minute cancellations, forgotten callbacks, messages left unread. After hanging up, I wandered through my modest suburban Chicago home. Robert and I had bought it 30 years ago when both kids were small. Now it felt too big, filled with echoes and memories. I paused at the mantelpiece, looking at family photographs. James's college graduation, Caroline's first architecture award, Robert in his accounting office. I picked up the last one, studying my husband's confident smile. He'd been the family's financial manager, keeping me unburdened by such concerns. "You never prepared me for this, Robert," I whispered to his photograph. "You never taught me how to be visible." The house phone rang again. It was James this time. "Mom, I need a favor," he began, without preamble. "Melissa and I are looking at a vacation property, but we're a bit short on the down payment. Could you lend us about $20,000? Just temporarily, of course." My hand tightened on the receiver. This wasn't the first temporary loan. There had been several since Robert died, none of which had been repaid. Robert had left me with our modest home, a teacher's pension, and some savings that had been steadily dwindling due to these unpaid loans and rising costs of living. "James, that's a lot of money," I said carefully. "Mom, it's not like you're using it," he replied with a laugh. "Besides, it's for your grandkids too. Think about how much Emma and Ethan would love a lake house." Before I could respond, he added, "We need to know by tomorrow. The realtor says there's another couple interested." After promising to think about it, I hung up and sank onto the couch. It wasn't that I didn't want to help my children, but there was something deeply wrong with these interactions. The assumption that my resources, financial, emotional, temporal, existed solely for their convenience. The next day, I transferred the money to James's account. 3 months later, I sat silently at their dining table as they regaled friends with stories of their new vacation property, describing how they'd saved diligently to afford it. No mention of my contribution. When I gently brought it up after their guests left, James looked annoyed. "Mom, nobody wants to talk about money during dinner," he said, as if I'd committed some terrible social faux pas. Later, I overheard him on the deck with Melissa. "She's getting so needy lately," he said. "Always bringing up the loan, like we're not good for it." "It's probably loneliness," Melissa replied. "Maybe we should look into those senior communities, where she'd have people her own age to talk to." I was 57, not 87, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. The wound from James's birthday had never fully healed, and now it reopened, deeper than before. I retreated to my car without saying goodbye. They didn't notice my departure. "I think we need to talk about how things have been between us," I said carefully, watching my children's expressions across my dining room table. It had taken weeks to gather my courage for this conversation, to invite them both to Sunday lunch with the explicit purpose of discussing our relationship. James checked his watch. Caroline's eyes kept drifting to her phone. "What things, Mom?" Caroline asked, her tone suggesting this was all very dramatic and unnecessary. "I feel invisible to you both," I said, the words coming out more shakily than I'd intended. "Like I'm just a convenience, not a person with feelings and value." James sighed heavily. "Is this about the lake house again?" "Mom, we've been over this. It's not just about the money, James. It's about respect, about acknowledgement." I took a deep breath. "I overheard what you said at your birthday party about me being just a retired school teacher. Nothing special." His face flushed. "You were eavesdropping on my conversations?" "I was standing 5 feet away, serving the dessert I'd spent 3 hours making." Caroline jumped in. "Mom, you're being hypersensitive." James didn't mean anything by it. "And at Thanksgiving," I continued, determined now, "I heard you both on the porch, laughing about how embarrassing it is when I try to join conversations about politics or technology." Now it was Caroline's turn to flush. "You were spying on us?" "I was bringing out more coffee," I said quietly. "You didn't notice me because you never do." The conversation deteriorated from there. They became defensive, then accusatory. James suggested I needed therapy for my insecurity issues. Caroline implied I was inventing problems because I had too much time on my hands. By the time they left, I felt hollowed out. My attempt at honest communication had been twisted, used against me. They weren't ready to hear me. Perhaps they never would be. 6 months passed. My 58th birthday arrived with nothing but perfunctory text messages from my children. Caroline had promised to visit, but canceled last minute for what she called an important professional commitment. Instagram revealed it was actually brunch with friends. Determined not to wallow in self-pity, I made a reservation at Bellini's, an upscale restaurant downtown that I'd always wanted to try. I dressed carefully in one of my nicer outfits, applied makeup, and tried to convince myself that taking myself out was a sign of independence, not loneliness. I was halfway through my entree when I saw them, James, Melissa, and a group of stylishly dressed friends being seated across the restaurant. I raised my hand in greeting, catching James's eye. He looked directly at me, then deliberately turned away, guiding his party toward the opposite side of the restaurant. The rejection was so blatant that it left me breathless. As I struggled to continue my meal with dignity, I overheard a snippet of conversation from his table. "Who was that older woman waving at you?" one of his friends asked. "Oh, nobody important," James replied dismissively. "Just a former client from the office. They get so attention-starved at that age." "Nobody important," just a former client, not even worth acknowledging as his mother. I paid my bill with shaking hands and drove home in a daze of hurt and humiliation. But by the time I pulled into my driveway, something had shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but now it was hardening into resolve. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding since Robert's death. I unlocked his home office and began going through his financial records. "Robert, what were you hiding from me?" I whispered, staring at the folder I'd discovered tucked behind a false panel in my late husband's desk drawer. Labeled Supplementary Investments, Confidential, it contained documents I'd never seen before. It had been 3 weeks since the restaurant incident, and I'd spent every evening methodically working through Robert's files. The pain of being publicly disowned by my son had ignited something in me, a determination to take control of my life, beginning with understanding my financial situation. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were investment records, stock certificates, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. I broke the seal, unfolding a letter dated just weeks before his sudden heart attack. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, and you finally decided to take charge of our finances. I've always managed our main accounts conservatively, as you know, but I created this separate portfolio as a bet on the future, our dream fund, as I like to think of it. These investments are in your name. Use them to live the life you've always deserved. With all my love, Robert." A second page explains something crucial. "I've arranged with my attorney, Michael Greenberg, to establish a blind trust for these investments, with instructions to contact you 5 years after my passing. This will give you time to adjust to life without me before making decisions about these assets. The trust is managed separately from our regular accounts, with all communications going to a P.O. box at my office." I spread the documents across the desk. Technology companies, pharmaceutical startups, emerging market funds investments Robert had made throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Companies whose names I now recognized as industry giants. The next morning, I called the law firm listed on Robert's documents. When I explained who I was, the receptionist immediately connected me to Michael Greenberg. "Mrs. Hayes," he said warmly, "I've been trying to locate you for the past year. We sent several letters to your home, called your landline, and even sent a courier twice but never received any response." "Letters?" I frowned. "I never received anything." "That's odd. We've been sending quarterly updates to your home address since last year, when the 5-year trust period ended. We also tried calling, but the number we had has been disconnected." A cold realization washed over me. James had insisted I change my landline provider to save money last year, which resulted in a new number. He'd also been collecting my mail whenever he visited, claiming he wanted to help sort through the junk. Could he have been intercepting my correspondence? "We even sent our paralegal to your house twice," Michael continued, "but no one answered the door. We were considering hiring a private investigator to locate you." I felt a chill. I remembered 2 occasions last year when I'd been out of town, once visiting an old teaching colleague, once on a short trip with my church group. Had those been the days they tried to reach me in person? 3 days later, I sat across from Michael and his associate, a financial advisor named Martin Geller, as they reviewed the full portfolio. "Mrs. Hayes," Martin said carefully, "these investments have performed exceptionally well. The original amount Robert invested was modest, about $180,000 from a small inheritance and some personal savings he kept separate. But his choices were remarkably prescient. Today, the portfolio is worth approximately $4.2 million. The room seemed to tilt. "That can't be right," I whispered. "It is," Michael confirmed. "Robert had a talent for spotting emerging technologies. He bought Apple and Amazon when they were just getting started, added Google during its early years. But why keep it secret from me?" I asked, still struggling to process the information. Michael smiled gently. "Robert explained it to me. He wanted to surprise you for your retirement. You were both planning to retire at 60. And he intended to reveal this nest egg then. After his death, the trust was designed to give you time to adjust before taking on these financial decisions. There's one more thing," Martin added. "These assets were placed in your name while Robert was still alive. Legally, they've been yours for years. This means we've avoided most estate tax complications, though there will be some paperwork to complete the transfer of control to you." "Who handled these investments after Robert died?" I asked. "The trust itself was managed by our firm," Michael explained. But communications about the trust were sent to a P.O. box at Robert's old accounting office. Harold Jenkins, Robert's partner, was supposed to forward any communications to you after the 5-year mark. He confirmed to us last year that he would do so. I frowned. Harold and I have barely spoken since the funeral. He never mentioned anything about a trust or investments. Michael's expression grew concerned. That's troubling. We'll need to look into that. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. $4 million. Not enough to make me extraordinarily wealthy by Chicago standards, but more than enough to transform my life completely, to give me options I'd never imagined having. I also wondered about those intercepted communications. Had James been deliberately keeping financial information from me? Or had Harold failed in his responsibilities? Either way, I needed to think carefully about my next steps. Not just about the money, but about what it meant for my relationships with my children and for my own future. One thing was certain. Things would never be the same again. "You're looking different," said Diane Sullivan, eyeing me across our coffee table at the community center where we both volunteered. At 65, she carried herself with a confidence I'd always admired, the assurance of a woman who'd rebuilt her life after a late-in-life divorce. "I'm feeling different," I admitted, self-consciously touching my newly styled hair. It had been 2 months since discovering Robert's investments, and I'd spent that time working quietly with Michael and Martin to understand and secure my assets. "Good different?" Diane pressed, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "I've recently discovered that I have options I didn't know existed before." Something in my tone must have intrigued her because she leaned forward. "Tell me more." Over the next hour, I found myself sharing everything: James's cruel words at his birthday, Caroline's constant cancellations, the restaurant incident, and finally the discovery of Robert's secret investments. $4 million, Diane repeated, whistling softly. "And your children don't know?" I shook my head. "I haven't told them. I'm still processing it myself." "And what are you planning to do with this newfound freedom?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the technical aspects working with Martin to understand my portfolio, setting up new accounts, learning about capital gains taxes and liquidation strategies that I hadn't fully considered the bigger implications. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to help my children. They're both struggling financially, despite their appearances. James's marketing firm has lost several major clients in the last 2 years, and Caroline's architecture practice has been hit hard by the economic downturn. But another part knows that throwing money at the problem won't fix the real issue," Diane finished for me. I nodded, relieved that she understood. "Eleanor," Diane said, her voice gentle but firm, "this is a rare opportunity for transformation, not just financial, but personal. Before you decide anything, I have a proposition for you." The proposition was simple. Diane invited me to join a series of workshops she was facilitating on reinvention after 50. For the next 6 weeks, I spent every Wednesday evening in a circle of women, all navigating major life transitions. Some were newly divorced, others recently retired, a few recovering from serious illness. All were redefining themselves. Through exercises, discussions, and Diane's insightful guidance, I began to develop a vision for my future one that went beyond being a convenient mother and grandmother. "The key," Diane told our group, "is strategic patience. Transformation isn't about grand gestures or burning bridges. It's about small, deliberate changes that gradually shift the dynamics of your relationships." Following her advice, I began implementing subtle boundaries. When James called asking for money for his children's private school tuition, I replied, "I can help with half this time. I have some personal expenses I need to address." His shock was palpable even through the phone. "Personal expenses? Like what?" "Just some things for myself, James," I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. "I'll transfer the half today." That evening, I enrolled in a photography course I'd always been interested in, but had dismissed as an indulgence. It was my first concrete step toward reclaiming my time and interests. The following week, when Caroline asked me to babysit her friend's children, along with my grandchildren so they could all attend a gallery opening, I said something that felt revolutionary. "I'm sorry, I have plans that evening." "Plans? What plans?" she demanded, the surprise in her voice almost comical. "My photography class has a night shoot at the lakefront," I explained. "Can't you reschedule?" "This is important, Mom. My commitments are important too." Caroline, I said gently. Perhaps next time if you give me more notice. As I hung up, my heart was pounding, as if I'd run a marathon. Such a small boundary, yet it felt momentous. That night in class, as I captured the city lights reflecting on Lake Michigan, I felt something unfamiliar stirring within me, the first tendrils of a new identity taking root. Eleanor Hayes? The woman at the boutique counter checked her appointment book. Yes, we have you down for the full wardrobe consultation at 10 a.m. That's me, I confirmed, still feeling slightly out of place in the upscale Michigan Avenue shop. 6 months had passed since I'd discovered Robert's investments, and I was following through on another of Diane's suggestions, external transformation to match my internal changes. I'm Vivian. I'll be your style consultant today, the woman said, extending her hand. What's the occasion we're dressing for? I hesitated. My new life, I suppose. Vivian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Tell me more while we look at some options. Over the next 3 hours, I shared condensed versions of my story, as Vivian guided me through selections that were elegant yet practical, sophisticated without trying too hard. We want pieces that command respect, she explained, not ones that scream for attention. By afternoon, I had ordered a complete new wardrobe, tailored pants and blazers in rich, subtle colors, well-cut dresses that flattered my figure, accessories that added polish without ostentation. The total was more than I'd spent on myself in the past 5 years combined, but still a tiny fraction of my newly discovered wealth. Parallel to these external changes, I continued my internal work. I took courses in financial literacy and investment management. I joined a philanthropy study group at the local community foundation. I sought out forums where I could learn about navigating this new world of wealth responsibly. The key, Martin explained during one of our monthly portfolio reviews, is to be strategic about liquidating assets. We don't want to sell everything at once for tax reasons, and some of these investments still have growth potential. We developed a 3-year plan to gradually diversify and partially liquidate the portfolio, ensuring I'd have both immediate funds and long-term security. I was learning the language of finance that had always seemed deliberately obscure when Robert was alive. Meanwhile, I kept thinking about purpose. What did I want to do with this unexpected gift? Diane's workshops had helped me understand that money without meaning was just numbers on a page. One evening, as my 59th birthday approached, I found myself at a lecture hosted by the Chicago Community Trust. The speaker, a former business executive who now ran a family foundation, described how philanthropy had transformed her understanding of wealth. Money can be a wall or a bridge, she said. It all depends on how you use it. Something clicked into place for me. I didn't want revenge against my children. I wanted recognition not just from them, but in a larger sense. I wanted to be visible, to matter, to create change that reflected my values. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with Sandra Wells, a consultant who specialized in helping individuals develop philanthropic strategies. I'm not looking to just write checks, I explained. I want to create something meaningful, something that addresses issues I care about. And what issues are those? Sandra asked. I thought about my experiences as a teacher, a mother, a woman rendered invisible by age and circumstance. Dignity, I said finally. The right to be seen and valued at every stage of life. The importance of intergenerational understanding and respect. Sandra nodded thoughtfully. Those are powerful themes, but broad. Let's work on narrowing them down to specific initiatives that could make tangible differences. Over the following months, as I completed my wardrobe transformation and continued my education, I also developed the framework for what would eventually become my foundation. It wasn't a quick process. Sandra emphasized that effective philanthropy required careful planning, clear objectives, and sustainable structures. This isn't something you can rush, she cautioned. The best foundations evolve over years, not months. I was learning patience, another skill that had atrophied during my years of accommodating everyone else's timelines. My transformation wasn't just about appearances or even independence. It was about reclaiming the thoughtful, purposeful person I'd once been, before invisibility became my default state. As my birthday arrived, I celebrated quietly with Diane and 2 other friends from our workshop group. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the sting of my children's inattention quite so sharply. I was building something new, a life with purpose, and possibly a legacy that would outlast me. During this period, I also discreetly asked Michael to investigate what happened to my trust communications. I have my suspicions, I told him, but I'd rather have facts before making accusations. We'll look into it, he promised. These are serious irregularities. I'm putting the house on the market, I announced to myself in the mirror, practicing the words I would soon share with my children. After 14 months of careful planning and personal transformation, I was ready for the next phase of my strategy. The doorbell rang right on time. My real estate agent, Claire Thompson, was a dynamic woman in her 40s with a reputation for discretion and effectiveness. It's a solid property in a desirable neighborhood, Claire confirmed after touring the house. Given the current market and the updates you've made, I think we can list it at $675,000 and expect serious offers within 2 weeks. I nodded, emotions churning beneath my composed exterior. This house held 30 years of memories, bedtime stories, Christmas mornings, family dinners. But it also held the ghosts of my invisibility, the echoes of disrespect. Let's do it, I said, signing the listing agreement. And Claire, I'd prefer if this could be kept relatively quiet initially. Of course, she agreed. We'll start with a private listing for the first week before going fully public. That evening, as expected, my phone rang. It was Caroline. Mom, why is our family home listed on Zillow? Her voice vibrated with indignation. I just got an alert about it. I've decided to sell, I replied calmly. It's too big for just me, and I'm ready for a change. But where will we have holiday gatherings? Where will the kids stay when they visit their grandmother? The question was revealing. Not, where will you live, but how will this inconvenience us? When was the last time we had a holiday gathering here, Caroline? I asked gently. And the children haven't stayed overnight in almost 2 years. That's not the point, she sputtered. You can't just sell our family home without consulting us. I'm not selling our home, Caroline. I'm selling my home, and I'm informing you now. After a similarly heated conversation with James, I sat in my garden feeling strangely peaceful. Their reactions had been exactly as predicted: outrage, not at how the change would affect me, but at how it would impact their nostalgia and convenience. 2 days later, the real earthquake hit. James called in a panic. Mom, I need to talk to you about something important, he said, his voice strained. Can I come over tonight? When he arrived, the confident marketing executive was gone, replaced by a man visibly on edge. He paced my living room, running his hands through his hair. I'm in trouble, he finally admitted. The firm is struggling. We lost 2 major clients in the last year, and I made some high-risk investments with the company's contingency fund that didn't work out. He explained how his marketing firm had been slowly losing ground to digital agencies. Rather than adapting, he doubled down on traditional approaches while taking increasingly desperate financial gambles to maintain their lifestyle. The kids' school is threatening to dismiss them if we don't catch up on tuition, and the bank is sending letters about the mortgage. Melissa doesn't even know how bad it is. I listened quietly, noting that this was the first time in years James had actually shared real problems with me instead of a sanitized, successful version of his life. I hate to ask, but is there any way you could help? Just temporarily. Maybe $40,000 to get caught up? I know it's a lot, but once things stabilize. In the past, I would have immediately agreed, emptying my modest savings to rescue him. Now, I had the means to give him 10 times that amount without blinking. But that wasn't the point of my transformation. James, I said carefully, I'm sorry you're going through this. It sounds incredibly stressful. So you'll help? Hope flickered in his eyes. I can't give you $40,000, I said gently. His face fell. Can't or won't? Both, I replied honestly. My finances are changing with the house sale and my own future planning. But more importantly, I don't think another bailout would truly help you in the long run. It's not a bailout, he protested. It's a mother helping her son. When does help become enabling? I asked. This isn't the first time, James, and each time nothing fundamentally changes. His expression hardened. So that's it? You're just going to let your grandchildren get kicked out of their school? Let us lose our house? There are other schools, I said calmly. And downsizing isn't the end of the world. Sometimes it's the beginning of honesty. As he left, angry and disappointed, I felt an odd mixture of guilt and resolve. This wasn't cruelty. It was the most genuine love I could offer. The chance for my son to face reality and find his own strength, just as I had been forced to do. 3 days later, my house received an offer for $695,000, $20,000 above asking price. I accepted immediately, setting wheels in motion that couldn't be reversed. Meanwhile, I'd been working with Sandra on developing concrete plans for what we now called the Hayes Initiative for Intergenerational Dignity. It wasn't yet a formal foundation that would take time, legal structures, and careful planning, but the seed had been planted. These things take time to grow properly, Sandra reminded me. Rushing into a foundation without clear objectives and governance would be a mistake. I was learning patience, and with it came a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in decades. During this period, Michael called with an update on his investigation. "We found some irregularities with the trust communications," he said carefully. "There's evidence that Harold Jenkins received all the notifications but failed to forward them to you as instructed. We're still looking into why." I thought about James and my earlier suspicions. "So it wasn't my son intercepting my mail?" "We can't be certain," Michael replied. "But the primary issue appears to be at Harold's end. We're considering legal options." "Mrs. Hayes, your table is ready." The maitre d' at Bellini's led me to a prime table overlooking the Chicago River. It was the same upscale restaurant where, 18 months earlier, James had publicly pretended not to know me. Today, I'd chosen it deliberately for this meeting. I checked my watch. Caroline was already 10 minutes late. No surprise there. As I sipped my sparkling water, I observed my reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the faded, apologetic mother who had dined here alone that night. My silver bob gleamed under the restaurant lights. My posture was straight, my eyes clear and direct. "Mom, sorry I'm late." Caroline rushed to the table, flustered and slightly out of breath. "Traffic was a nightmare." "No problem," I said pleasantly. "I ordered some appetizers for us." Her eyes darted around the restaurant, clearly impressed and slightly confused by my choice of venue. "This place is expensive. What's the occasion?" "No special occasion. I just enjoy the view." The waiter arrived with our appetizers, and Caroline immediately launched into a litany of complaints about her latest project, her difficult client, her unreasonable boss. I listened attentively, noting how she assumed I had nothing more interesting to discuss than her problems. "How are things with you?" she finally asked, almost as an afterthought. "Actually, I have some news," I said. "The house sale closed yesterday, and I've purchased a new place." "Oh?" Her interest was only mild. "One of those senior communities you were looking at?" I smiled. "Not exactly. I bought a condominium in the Montgomery." Caroline choked on her wine. "The Montgomery? Downtown? Those units go for millions?" "Yes, I'm aware. I purchased a 2-bedroom on the 23rd floor. The views are spectacular." She stared at me, bewildered. "But how could you possibly afford—" "There's something else I should share," I continued calmly. "About a year and a half ago, I discovered some investments your father had made that I wasn't aware of. It turns out they've performed quite well." "What kind of investments?" Caroline's voice had taken on a sharp edge. "Technology stocks primarily. Companies like Apple, Amazon, Google before they became what they are today. Your father had quite the foresight." "And you never told us about this?" Her tone had shifted from confusion to accusation. "How much are we talking about?" "The current value is approximately $4 million, I said, keeping my voice level. "It was part of a blind trust your father set up before he died, arranged to contact me 5 years after his passing. Unfortunately, there was a problem with the communications. I only discovered it when I started going through his papers after my birthday dinner last year." Caroline's face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally, something resembling betrayal. $4 million, and you've kept this secret for a year and a half? While I've been struggling to keep my practice afloat in this economy? I didn't mention my initial suspicions about James possibly intercepting my mail, or the ongoing investigation into Harold's handling of the trust communications. Those were complicated matters still being resolved. I needed time to understand my new situation and decide how I wanted to move forward, I explained. It was a lot to process. There were complex tax implications, portfolio adjustments, legal documentation. "So what does this mean?" Caroline demanded. "Are you finally going to help us?" The finally stung, as if I hadn't spent decades helping them in every way I could. "That depends," I said carefully, "on what kind of help would truly benefit everyone in the long run." "What's that supposed to mean?" "James could lose his house, Mom. His children, your grandchildren, are being pulled out of their school." "I'm aware of James's situation," I said, "and I have a proposition for both of you. That's why I asked you to meet me here today. James should be joining us shortly." As if on cue, I saw my son enter the restaurant. His appearance had changed dramatically in just a few weeks. His expensive haircut had grown out, his designer suit replaced by more modest attire. The strain was visible on his face. He spotted us and approached the table, his expression darkening when he saw Caroline already there. "What's going on?" he asked warily. "Mom's been hiding $4 million from us," Caroline blurted out before I could speak. "For over a year." James's head snapped toward me, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Is that true?" "Please sit down, James," I said calmly. "I have something important to discuss with both of you." As he slowly lowered himself into the chair, I took a deep breath. The moment I had carefully planned for months was finally here, the moment when everything would change. $4 million, James repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief. "All this time, you've had $4 million, and you refused to help when I came to you about the tuition? When I told you we might lose our house?" We sat in a private dining area at Bellini's, where I'd arranged for more privacy after the initial shock had caused quite a scene in the main restaurant. "James, Caroline," I began carefully, "I know this is a lot to process, but before we go any further, I need you both to understand something fundamental. This money doesn't change who I am, but it has changed how I see myself and what I want for my future and for our family." "What does that mean exactly?" Caroline asked, suspicion lacing her words. "It means I'm establishing an initiative focused on intergenerational dignity and education," I explained. "I've been working with philanthropic advisors for the past year to develop a structured approach. We're starting with targeted community programs while we navigate the complex legal and tax requirements of establishing a formal foundation, which could take another year or more." "A foundation?" James looked incredulous. "You don't know the first thing about running a foundation." "That's why I've been taking courses in nonprofit management and philanthropy," I replied calmly, "and why I've assembled a team of experienced advisors, including Diane Sullivan, who has extensive experience in the philanthropic sector, and Sandra Wells, a respected consultant who specializes in helping new foundations establish effective governance structures." "Who the hell are these people?" Caroline demanded. "Professionals who've been guiding me through this transition," I said. "The process of establishing a foundation is complex. It requires approval from the IRS, establishment of proper governance, development of grant-making procedures, and much more. It's not something that happens overnight." James leaned forward, his expression calculated. "Okay, so you're starting some kind of charity project. That still leaves plenty of money. Surely you don't need all of that for yourself." "No, I don't," I agreed. Which brings me to the second part of what I wanted to discuss. I have propositions for both of you. Their expressions shifted instantly, from accusatory to attentive. It was remarkable how the prospect of money could command their focus when nothing else could. "James, I understand your marketing firm is struggling, and you're at risk of losing both your house and your children's educational opportunities." He nodded grimly. "My initiative needs marketing expertise, someone to develop our communication strategy, build relationships with community partners, and help articulate our mission. It's a complex role that would draw on your professional experience while requiring you to develop new skills in the nonprofit sector." His face registered confusion. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," I corrected. "The position would start at $85,000 annually, with benefits significantly less than you're accustomed to, but stable. It would require a genuine commitment to the mission, not just a temporary solution to your financial problems." Before he could respond, I turned to Caroline. "We're also planning to renovate a historical building in Bronzeville as our eventual headquarters, a community space that will house our programs while honoring the neighborhood's cultural significance. This would be a multi-year project requiring an architect who can balance historical preservation, community needs, and practical functionality." Caroline's architectural practice specialized in luxury homes and high-end commercial spaces. This would be a dramatic shift for her. "The project budget is substantial," I continued, "though certainly not what you'd earn designing another luxury condo development. But like James's position, it comes with something beyond financial compensation, the chance to create spaces that genuinely impact people's lives." "Let me get this straight," Caroline said, her voice tight. "You're offering us jobs? Working for you?" "Working with me," I corrected, "for a mission that I believe is important. These wouldn't be immediate positions. The marketing role would begin in about 3 months as we formalize our initial programs, and the architectural project wouldn't start for at least 6 months, given the regulatory approvals needed. And if we refuse? James asked bluntly. I met his gaze directly. Then you refuse. These aren't ultimatums. They're opportunities, chances to redirect paths that, from what I can see, haven't been bringing either of you much fulfillment or stability despite the outward appearances. So that's it? Caroline's voice was rising. No help with my apartment payments? No loan to keep James's family in their home? Just jobs with your vanity project? The words stung, but I kept my composure. The initiative is not a vanity project. It's something I believe in deeply. And yes, that's my offer. This is unbelievable, James muttered. All these months, watching us struggle. When you could have— I could have what, James? I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. Continued being your ATM? Kept enabling patterns that weren't serving any of us well? You both saw me as nothing more than a convenience for years. A babysitter, a lender, a silent supporter who would never ask for recognition or respect. That's not fair, Caroline protested. Isn't it? When was the last time either of you called just to check on me? Not to ask for something, not to cancel plans, but simply because you cared how I was doing? The silence that followed was deafening. I don't want to punish you, I said more gently. I want to rebuild, to create a relationship based on mutual respect rather than convenience and obligation. These positions are part of that vision. As they absorbed my words, I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, weighing their diminishing options against their pride, their immediate needs against their resentment. I need time to think about this, James finally said. Of course, I nodded. The positions will remain open for 2 weeks. After that, I'll need to look elsewhere. As we prepared to leave, Caroline asked the question I'd been waiting for. And what about the other money? What are your plans for that? I smiled slightly. That's for me to know, and for you to find out when I decide to share it. 2 years had passed since my discovery of Robert's investments, and my 60th birthday had come and gone with little fanfare. I stood at the podium in the renovated community room of the Southside Cultural Center, addressing the small gathering of community partners, program participants, and supporters of what we now officially called the Hayes Initiative for Intergenerational Dignity. Thank you all for coming today to mark our first anniversary of programming, I began. When we launched last year with our pilot intergenerational mentorship program, many people were skeptical. Today, I'm proud to say we've connected over 100 seniors with young people in our community, creating meaningful relationships that benefit both generations. The audience was modest but engaged local educators, community leaders, participants in our programs, and a few interested philanthropists from established Chicago foundations. In the back row sat James, looking uncomfortable in business casual attire, but attentive. Caroline had declined to attend, still resistant to what she called my pet project. Our growth had been intentionally slow and focused. Sandra had emphasized the importance of proving our concept before expanding, and we'd spent the first year establishing credibility through careful documentation of our impact, building relationships with existing community organizations rather than competing with them. Next month, we'll begin the first phase of planning for our headquarters renovation, I continued, nodding toward the architectural renderings displayed on easels. These preliminary plans, developed in consultation with community members and preservation experts, will transform the historic Johnson Building into a multi-generational space for learning, connection, and dignity. The actual construction phase is likely to begin in about a year, once we complete all the necessary approvals and fundraising. The renderings had been created by a respected architectural firm specializing in community spaces, not by Caroline, who had ultimately declined my job offer, choosing instead to pursue high-end residential projects in the suburbs. Her practice was struggling, but her pride wouldn't allow her to accept what she viewed as charity disguised as work. James, on the other hand, had eventually accepted the marketing position after his firm declared bankruptcy. Initially resentful and minimally engaged, he'd gradually become more invested as he witnessed the impact of our programs. He wasn't passionate, not yet, but he was professional, and occasionally, I caught glimpses of genuine interest. His relationship with Melissa had become strained as their financial difficulties mounted. They were now living separately. Melissa had taken the children, now 9 and 7, to stay with her parents while they figured things out. The separation had shaken James deeply, forcing him to confront not just his financial failures, but the priorities that had led to them. After my presentation, during the modest reception, a representative from the Chicago Community Trust approached me. "Eleanor, I'm impressed with your methodical approach," she said. "So many new initiatives try to grow too quickly and lose focus. You've been patient and strategic." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of the validation from an established foundation. "We're learning as we go. The Community Trust might be interested in supporting your mentorship expansion next year," she continued. "Your evaluation metrics are solid, and we like that you're collaborating with existing organizations rather than duplicating services." As she moved on, Diane joined me, champagne flute in hand. "Look at you," she said with a proud smile. "From invisible to influential in 2 years." I laughed softly. "Hardly influential yet. We're still tiny compared to established foundations. But growing correctly," Diane noted. "Building credibility step by step." Across the room, I noticed James engaged in conversation with the director of a youth education program. He was nodding thoughtfully, taking notes. Despite his initial resentment, his marketing expertise was genuine, and he'd begun to apply it with increasing commitment to our work. Later, as the event wound down, James approached me. "That was a good presentation," he said, his compliment cautious but sincere. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Mom," he hesitated, then continued. "Melissa wants to know if you'd come for dinner this Sunday. She and the kids are back at the house for the weekend. They miss you." It was the first such invitation in months. Since accepting the job, James had kept our relationship strictly professional, maintaining emotional distance. This small olive branch signified a potential shift. "I'd like that," I said, careful to keep my tone neutral despite the surge of emotion I felt. That evening, as I returned to my downtown condominium, I reflected on our progress. The initiative was growing steadily, if slowly. My relationship with James remained complicated, but was evolving beyond the transactional dynamic we'd had for years. Caroline remained distant, though she had recently begun responding to my texts more consistently. The foundation's legal structure was still in development. The IRS approval process was notoriously slow, and establishing proper governance took time. But our community programs were making real, if modest, impact. As I stood on my balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in what I'd accomplished, sadness for the relationship still strained, hope for what might yet develop. The transformation I'd begun 2 years ago wasn't complete, not by far, but I was firmly on a path of my own choosing, visible and valued in ways I hadn't been for decades. And that, I realized, was perhaps the most profound change of all. Also, during this time, Michael had continued his investigation into Harold's handling of the trust communications. "We found evidence that he may have misappropriated some smaller accounts as well," he told me. "We're building a case, but these things move slowly." "Grandma Eleanor, look what I made in art class!" Emma, now 11, rushed toward me, waving a colorful drawing as I entered James and Melissa's considerably downsized home. They had sold their large house 8 months earlier, moving to a modest 3-bedroom in a different neighborhood. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, genuinely admiring her work. "Tell me about these symbols here." As Emma launched into an enthusiastic explanation, I noticed James watching us from the doorway, his expression unreadable. 28 months had passed since I'd discovered the investments, and while our professional relationship had stabilized, James was now fully engaged in his role as marketing director. Our personal interactions still carried an undercurrent of tension. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. "Melissa's just finishing up." The mention of Melissa was significant. After a 5-month separation following their financial collapse, she had returned, committing to rebuilding their marriage on more honest terms. They were still working through their issues in couples therapy, but the fact that they were trying spoke volumes. Our relationship remained strained. She clearly resented my role in their downsizing, but we maintained civil interactions for the children's sake. The dining table was smaller than their previous one, the dinnerware more modest, but the atmosphere felt somehow more authentic. 9-year-old Ethan proudly showed me his place at the table. "I said it all myself, Grandma." "Perfect job," I praised him. During dinner, the conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years, focused on the children's activities and interests rather than materialistic concerns. When Emma mentioned her school's photography club, James surprised me by saying, "Your grandmother could give you some tips. She's quite talented." It was the first time he had acknowledged any of my personal pursuits. After the children were excused, James poured coffee for us adults. "Mom, there's something I need to discuss with you." "Here it comes," I thought, bracing myself for another request for money. "The youth mentorship program we're developing at the foundation, I think we can expand it significantly," he said instead. "I've been talking with 3 additional schools in underserved areas, and they're eager to participate, but we'd need to increase the budget allocation." I blinked in surprise. This wasn't what I had expected at all. "I've drafted a proposal," he continued, pulling out a folder. "The potential impact could be substantial." As he walked me through his ideas, I saw genuine passion in his eyes, something I hadn't witnessed in years. The marketing director position, initially accepted out of financial desperation, had awakened something in him. His work was connecting with young people who needed guidance, particularly boys without father figures. "This is excellent work, James," I said sincerely. "Let's review it with the full advisory board next week." "There's something else," he said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "Caroline's in trouble." My heart sank. "What kind of trouble?" "Her design firm is closing. She's lost most of her high-end clients to competitors, and she's facing eviction from her apartment. She's too proud to tell you herself." "I see," I said quietly. "And has she asked you to intervene on her behalf?" James shook his head. "No. She doesn't know I'm telling you this. But Mom, I think she's really struggling. Not just financially, but everything. Her girlfriend Elaine left her last month. They'd only been dating for about 6 months. But Caroline was really invested in the relationship. Her business is failing. She needs help, but she'll never ask for it." I absorbed this information carefully. I hadn't even known Caroline was seeing someone. That's how distant we'd become. She had rejected my initial offer, maintaining her distance even as James gradually integrated into the initiative's work. Our interactions had been minimal and often tense. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I'll think about how to approach her." As I prepared to leave, James walked me to my car. The night air was cool and crisp with early autumn. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "I owe you an apology." I turned to face him, surprised. "For what specifically?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Fair question. For a lot of things." He took a deep breath. "For treating you like you were dispensable. For only calling when I needed something. For that night at Bellini's when I pretended not to know you." The memory still stung, but less sharply now. "When I took this job, I was just desperate," he admitted. "I resented you for not just giving me the money outright. But these past months, I've seen how you interact with the seniors in our programs, how you listen to them, value them. It made me realize I never really did that with you." His words warmed something in me that had been cold for a very long time. "I'm not saying everything's fixed," he added quickly. "I still struggle sometimes with how everything changed, but I want you to know that I see what I did wrong, what we all did wrong." I reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you for telling me that, James." The next day, I did something I'd been contemplating for months. I arranged to meet with the architectural firm handling our headquarters renovation and asked them about bringing on an associate architect for the community spaces within the building. "We need someone who can design interiors that foster dignity and connection across generations," I explained. "Someone who might bring a fresh perspective." 3 days later, I called Caroline and invited her to coffee. It was time for another difficult conversation, another opportunity for transformation, not just for her, but for both of us. The Hayes Initiative for Intergenerational Dignity is pleased to announce the establishment of our formal foundation status, read the press release that had just gone out to local media. After 3 years of community programming and careful development, we have received official 501c3 designation from the IRS. I sat in my office in our partially renovated headquarters, reviewing the quarterly financial reports with our newly hired executive director, Anthony Martinez. At 61, I had realized that while I wanted to remain involved in the foundation, I didn't want to manage its day-to-day operations indefinitely. Anthony, with 15 years of nonprofit leadership experience, was the perfect person to guide the organization into its next phase. "Our programming budget has increased by 22% this year," Anthony noted. largely due to the Chicago Community Trust Grant and the new corporate partnerships James has developed. I nodded, proud of how far we'd come since our modest beginnings. We now operated 3 core programs: intergenerational mentoring, technology education for seniors, and a community history project, all showing measurable impact in their communities. And the renovation? I asked. Phase 1 is on schedule and on budget, Anthony replied. Caroline's revisions to the community spaces have been well received by the board and our community advisors. The mention of Caroline brought a small smile to my face. Her journey with the foundation had been far rockier than James's. After her design firm collapsed, she had initially accepted my offer of a limited consulting role with extreme reluctance, viewing it as a humiliating step backward in her career. Her first designs had been technically proficient but soulless, clearly executed with minimal investment. The turning point came during a community feedback session when an elderly resident had challenged her directly. "Young lady," the woman had said, "these spaces look pretty, but do they understand what it means to age with dignity? Have you ever sat in a beautiful chair you couldn't get out of because your knees don't work right anymore?" Rather than responding defensively, Caroline had listened. Then, surprising everyone, she had asked for 2 weeks to completely revise her approach. The designs she returned with showed a profound shift in perspective spaces that elegantly balanced aesthetics with genuine functionality, dignity with practicality. Since then, her role had expanded gradually. She wasn't an employee like James, preferring to maintain her independent consultant status, but her involvement had deepened, and with it, slowly, our relationship had begun to heal. She had also started dating again a professor of urban planning named Rachel, whom she'd met through her work with the foundation. It was too early to tell where the relationship was heading, but Caroline seemed happier than she'd been in years. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. James entered, followed by Caroline, a rare joint visit. "Do you have a minute?" James asked, uncharacteristically nervous. "Of course," I replied. Gesturing to the chairs across from my desk, Anthony excused himself tactfully, leaving us alone. I noticed my children exchanging glances, seemingly deciding who would speak first. "We've been talking," Caroline finally began, "about Dad's old accounting firm." This wasn't at all what I'd expected. Robert's small accounting practice had been sold to his junior partner shortly after his death, a transaction I'd had minimal involvement in, given my lack of financial knowledge at the time. "What about it?" I asked cautiously. "We think you should look into what happened to it," James said. "Specifically, to Dad's client files and correspondence." I frowned. "Why?" Caroline leaned forward. "Remember how you said Dad had set up that blind trust with instructions to contact you 5 years after his death? And how you never received any of those communications until you found the documents yourself?" "Yes," I said slowly, not sure where this was heading. "Well, I've been doing some research," James continued. "The firm was sold to Harold Jenkins, Dad's junior partner. 2 years later, Harold sold it again to a larger regional firm. But before that sale, there was a period of about 6 months where Harold was the only one managing all client communications. We think," Caroline added, "that Harold might have intercepted the trust communications, maybe even other financial notifications meant for you." I studied them thoughtfully. Michael's investigation had already confirmed much of this, but I was touched by their concern. "Actually," I said, "my attorney has been investigating Harold for the past year. There's evidence he misappropriated funds from several smaller accounts and deliberately withheld trust communications from multiple clients, not just me. Legal proceedings are underway, though these cases move slowly." Their surprised expressions confirmed they hadn't known about the investigation. "Why didn't you tell us?" Caroline asked. "For the same reason I initially wondered if James might have been intercepting my mail," I said gently. "Trust had been broken in so many ways between us. I needed to verify facts before making accusations." James looked startled. "You thought I was taking your mail?" "Briefly," I admitted. "You had been collecting it for me, and you'd changed my phone number. It seemed possible. I'm glad I was wrong." A moment of uncomfortable silence followed as they absorbed this. "Mom, there's something else," James finally said. "The Foundation's anniversary celebration next month. Caroline and I would like to speak at it. To publicly acknowledge your vision and, well, to acknowledge some other things too." The offer touched me deeply. "I'd like that," I said simply. After they left, I stood by the window of my office, looking out at the neighborhood our foundation was gradually becoming part of. 3 years ago, I had been invisible, a convenience, a background character in my own life. Now I stood at the center of something meaningful, surrounded by people who saw me, really saw me for who I was. The journey hadn't been simple or straightforward. The relationships with my children remained works in progress, with occasional setbacks and misunderstandings. The foundation faced ongoing challenges, funding uncertainties, programmatic adjustments, community politics. My personal transformation continued to evolve, sometimes in unexpected directions. But the fundamental change was undeniable. I had reclaimed my voice, my presence, my right to be valued. Not through dramatic confrontation or bitter estrangement, but through quiet, persistent assertion of my own worth. The following month, at our 3rd anniversary celebration, James and Caroline did indeed speak. Standing together at the podium, they acknowledged publicly what had taken years to recognize privately. "Our mother," James said, his voice steady, "taught us that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. Sometimes quietly, sometimes through actions rather than words, but always with unwavering determination." Caroline added, "The mission of this foundation isn't abstract for us, it's deeply personal, because we experienced firsthand what happens when we fail to see the value in those closest to us, especially as they age." Later that evening, surrounded by supporters, community members, and the growing team of professionals who were carrying the foundation's work forward, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with final endings. This journey would continue, evolving in ways I couldn't predict. Emma, now 12, slipped her hand into mine. "Grandma," she whispered, "when I grow up, I want to run a foundation like yours." I smiled down at her. "You'll create your own path, sweetheart. That's the most important thing I've learned. We all must find our own way to be seen." As the celebration continued around us, I caught sight of my reflection in a window, a woman standing tall, eyes bright with purpose, no longer faded into the background. The transformation hadn't been about revenge or punishment. It had been about reclamation of my voice, my value, my visibility. And in that reclamation, something unexpected had happened. By refusing to remain invisible, I had created space for authentic relationships to gradually, imperfectly emerge, relationships based not on obligation or convenience, but on genuine recognition of each other's humanity. The thunderous silence of my dignity had finally been heard. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel and don't miss the next video with more stories that will touch your heart.